Hello everyone, it's Charlton. Please subscribe to my channel. Tap the notification bell. I'd appreciate it majorly. This is quick. I just noticed that Senator Rand Paul has tested positive for the coronavirus, so he's going to be in quarantine for at least the next 14 days. Or at least that's they kind of sort of downplay it a little bit on his Twitter feed. I'll go to that in a second. And he was asymptomatic, so I'm not sure why he felt that he needed to get tested, or if there's something that we just don't know and that they're keeping private some of the aspects of his story. But he has tested positive for the coronavirus, and he's the first senator to do so. There's been a couple congresspersons that have. I know. So I forget the guy's name, the guy from Florida who's a Republican, as well as McAdams, who I think is the Democrat from Utah. I was actually watching the Republican congressman from Florida, whose brother's a reporter on NBC, talk about it, how it just absolutely hit him like a ton of bricks. And it was pretty brutal, and even though he seems to be on the mend. One of the things he did say, and I'll get to Rand Paul in a second, is that it came back. It kept, like, I've seen this in multiple reports where people say they feel like they're getting better and they think they're getting, they're on the mend, and then it comes back even worse. And then that's actually happened, in succession, like not just once, but maybe two or three times, before they finally do get better and stay on the mending path. Anyways, but Rand Paul is the first senator to test positive for coronavirus. Like I said just a second ago, that he was asymptomatic, and it says that Paul is asymptomatic and was not aware of making direct contact with an infected person. So I don't know what prompted him to get a test in the first place, but he has tested positive. The thing that, and I don't know who he's had contact with in the Senate. I mean, in fact, he was, I think, the only person who voted against, was the only senator that voted against the bipartisan $8 billion deal. That was the coronavirus package number 2. Or no, that was the first one. That was the first one. I think the $8.3 billion was the first one, which started out when they were discussing it as like $1 billion or something like that, but it grew to $8.3 billion. 100 something billion was the second one, and they're working on the third one right now. But he must have been in the Senate for that vote. He's had to have contact with other, staff and senators, at least to some extent. So I'm sure that's an issue as well for himself, because of that crazy altercation he had with his neighbor way back when. That was pretty severe, and I think a lot of people who don't necessarily follow Rand Paul didn't realize how severe that incident was, where his neighbor basically tackled him and sort of blindsided him, and just attacked him, leveling him to the ground and so forth, and I think hitting him directly in the ribs and then smashing him like a football tackle into the ground, something like that. But because of that, Rand Paul had to have a portion of his own lungs, removed, So I would think that, I mean, maybe this is why he had himself tested, just out of an abundance of caution, because he could be in one of the high threat levels because of this prior medical incident involving having to have his, a portion of his lungs removed, and I would think he is at an elevated risk, even though he's not super old, up there in age. He's 57 years old, and he seems to be a pretty healthy individual. I'm almost certain that he's not a smoker or anything like that, and he seems pretty healthy. That other incident, I think, is going to be a factor for sure. So Senator Rand Paul has tested positive for the coronavirus. His office announced on Twitter Sunday why it matters. He's the first U.S. senator to test positive. According to his office, Paul is asymptomatic and was not aware of making direct contact with an infected person. Paul, a notorious deficit hawk, was the only senator to vote against a bipartisan $8 billion deal to provide emergency coronavirus funding. Earlier this month, he sought to introduce an amendment that would take the funding from the State Department and the U.S. Agency for International Development, but it was voted down 80-16. So, according to his Twitter account, it says Senator Rand Paul has tested positive for COVID-19. He is feeling fine and is in quarantine. He is asymptomatic and was tested out of abundance of caution due to his extensive travel and events. He was not aware of any direct contact with any infected person. He expects to be back in the Senate after his quarantine period ends, and will continue to work for the people of Kentucky at this difficult time. 10 days ago, our D.C. office began operating remotely, hence virtually no staff has had contact with Senator Rand Paul. Okay, so we absolutely must resist government run amok, taking advantage of a crisis. This is how our liberty dies. That's from a previous tweet about the various stimulus packages, that the most recent one that they're discussing, which is going to be big. It's going to be huge. It's going to be well over $1 trillion. I've heard several people ask for $4 trillion, or two to 4 trillion. And it's probably going to, I bet, get into close to 2 trillion, 1.5 and up. But back when he had this incident, just to Republican Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky said on Monday, part of his lung was removed this weekend following a 2017 attack by his neighbor. So this is August 2019. Unfortunately, I will have to limit my August activities. Part of my lung damage by the 2017 assault had to be removed by surgery this weekend. The doctors, nurses, and staff at Vanderbilt University Medical Center were great. I should be able to return to the Senate in September. Paul was attacked at his home in Bowling Green, Kentucky by his neighbor, Renee Boucher, an anesthesiologist and former colleague of Paul's, on November 3rd, 2017, that left the center with 6 broken ribs and bruised lungs. And it goes on to talk about that incident. That's all it basically says, is that he had a portion of his lungs removed as a result of that. But that obviously, limits his breathing ability. And this disease, coronavirus, is a respiratory, disease. That's where it seems to attack almost instantaneously. I've heard again and again from several people that had it, after a sniffle, and as and developing a severe headache and bad fever, it just goes straight for the lungs. And people describe not being able to breathe. Like one of the McAdams, the rep from Utah, described it as a belt wrapped around his chest. People having difficulty catching their breath, which has got to be very scary. So for Rand Paul, it's very possible he had himself tested because of that, and but he's tested positive. We'll see how it turns out. And that's the story there, man. Thanks for watching my videos. Please subscribe to my channel. Give me a like down below. I'll see you in the next video. Later, man.